energy, the motive, what it was that you wanted, and how integration was the solution to what you wanted. You said you wanted to get better. What was their united purpose? What was the purpose? What was the goal everyone inside was trying to achieve that facilitated this?
That things couldn't stay the same anymore. I could not live the way I was with all of these parts and all of these feelings and all of these memories and everything happening at once, and no, couldn't have the man I wanted, and I couldn't get life happening, and it was just like the life I had and who I was and how I was just couldn't be anymore. And everybody would rather be dead than continue the way they were. And the alternative to death was integration.
Somehow all of you knew that would help resolve this.
Well, actually, I think it was almost that it was an end to the resistance to the integration, because the integration had mostly been going on for like a year. I initially, growing up, the inner world was all through me.
Can you show?
Yeah.
I think, and then we'll make a snapshot of the picture. But let's just hold it up.
Various examples. This is probably just the clearest example of this was well into therapy. This is not what it looked like, but when I was up until they did the lockdowns and shutdowns of the trainings and stuff, all of my altar system and my inner world was sort of throughout my body. And then when they did this joint lock thing, it locked it all into my brain. So when I encountered it in therapy, it was all in my brain. And I knew that, even though it felt like a whole world. And it was a big world with all kinds of stuff in it. And then a year to the day before the integration, there was this kind of clunk thing, and the joint lock thing that locked it all in my head unlocked, and it just was like I felt it. It was this wild, weird. This is what it looked like after, and it was like this clunk, thunk, and it was like I literally felt my being and this world fill my body again, and then it was like this, and that was the first part of the integration. That was when it got unlocked out of my brain and integrate my whole body again, and that was what I understand to be the beginning of the integration. And then for that next year was the process of the Patricia May Full Potential altar, absorbing the knowledge, not quite absorbing the altars to make them go away, but absorbing their knowledge, their feelings, their experiences, and them and her forming bonds, and finishing up any last little bits that were kind of holding up the process, and the bringing together of that altar and the outside one that always was called Trish, and that when we had that space that was when we had reached a point where we couldn't make it go any further. We kept trying to have Trish sink into the other parts, and the other parts push out to her, but there was too much resistance. We just couldn't quite allow it somehow. There was too much fear of who I am being dead and gone, that kind of thing. And then when we reached that point when there was just this unity of everyone would rather be dead than carry on the way they were, that was when the resistance disappeared. We all had a united purpose, and we all had we all wanted the same thing, and the resistance went away, and overnight it just changed. But it had been in the works for a year, so it wasn't an overnight process really. It just I went to bed one night multiple and woke up the next morning one person.
And the same thing you all wanted was?
The same thing we all wanted was to be dead, to not hurt anymore, to not have to work anymore at trying to fix ourselves, to not have to go through life this way anymore.
Meaning split
and overwhelmed, trying to cope with putting it all together and processing it and working at it, and we all wanted that guy back, and we all would rather be dead without him. And there was just a few pieces that I guess, but they were really significant pieces that we all shared. Even the male parts just would rather be dead than deal with more of this shit.
Okay, so but I'm still a little confused because
Okay.
somehow integration, you didn't have to deal with as much chaos once you were integrated. Somehow there was something, there were all these horrible feelings wanting to be dead, and then you woke up integrated and you were better. I'm trying to figure out how A led to B.
I wasn't exactly better. I was different.
Yes.
I was whole and able to approach life in a new way that I hadn't been able to do before. Everything, even when I had all the knowledge of the altars and everything, as long as I stayed multiple, I had a disconnectedness about everything and a constantly striving to put things together all the time.
Okay.
And that eased up with integration. Being one person, being whole, also just plain showed me that I'd done the work, that I hadn't been just wasting all these years, and that there might be hope and future after all. Where I was, I could not see any potential for any life, any hope, anything until that shift occurred.
So what would you recommend to survivors as a direction to hope for or to work toward that would
Wholeness.
help them move toward the wholeness?
Wholeness. I wouldn't say aim for integration. I wouldn't say aim for anything but wholeness. Mind, body, heart, soul. And wholeness, however that manifests for you. That's all I ever did was aim for wholeness. And I didn't, until the very last little bit, I didn't care about the integration at all. It was that I be healed, that I not carry around the suffering and the pain and the karma and energy magnetism and all those different things that I understand to be facts. And I didn't perceive any other way to be other than aim for wholeness and healthiness, wholeness and healthiness. And so my aim for wholeness, aim for just being a whole being. And whether that means a whole being with 100 personalities that function well together, or whether that means wholeness in the form of integration like I had with a whole bunch of tiny little weird functionality things, or whatever wholeness is for you.
Okay.
To kind of back up a little bit here, just to give a little perspective to people watching this, who abused you? What kinds of groups?
My mother was in some kind of what I sort of call a healing magic kind of cult, sort of mostly about healing and energy work and stuff like that. Mostly good stuff, but they had a couple of weird kind of beliefs and rituals, and they were very matriarchal. My dad came from some kind of Scottish clan, kind of sort of druidic like clan thing, and there was some kind of weird little rituals there. Mostly those were like baptism type of dealies at 6 months and weird stuff with mom and dad's. Dad's was patriarchal. And then through my dad's father, who was actually his stepfather, and my mother was very motivated to move up in the world. And through my grandfather, the way I understand it is that my grandfather and her offered her through he was a part of a group, and they sort of like the CIA stuff. I don't know if it actually was CIA stuff or what, but it was in the time of the Cold War and the Manchurian candidates and all of this kinds of stuff. And they had come to the understanding of brainwashing and that you could split off parts of a person to do as they're told. And so through that, I ended up, through mom and my grandfather, ended up involved in these, with this, what I understood was a military group, and that I would get all this special training, and then I'd get education and status and stuff, social status and stuff too out of it, is what I understand was supposed to happen. And what I ended up basically through that, it was a lot of mind control training and splits right from birth, and they used me as a demonstration model to show how thoroughly they could split the mind into different and train up different personalities that would not know about each other and would do as they're told, and have total controllable little slaves, that me as a slave, that you could make me into a soldier, you could make me, I could pull out and be, a soldier and do the martial arts or whatever, or I could be the little sex slave or whatever. So I had a variety of trainings, and the primary ones were sex slave and voice of the gods, oracle, and there was preacher and stuff kind of twisted in with that, and then some soldier stuff, spy stuff. And through all of that, I also had a handler that was into rituals and power rituals and energy rituals and very much done like satanic rituals, only they weren't necessarily satanic. They were more aimed at gaining power or getting rid of enemies. So I had a lot of that kind of weird rituals in there. And then through that military group, there was a lot of sex slave trafficking. I had to help train sex slaves and stuff in addition to being one. There was a lot of child porn and snuff films, and that was other cults around town, one of who was a satanic cult, did a lot of that. And the different cults and groups trade children and work together. And so I was often used in the child porn films and the snuff films. And what else? Rented out to the neighbors, little strip teases for the neighbors or whatever. Rented to the guy in the middle of the night in the hospital, rented out to men that would come in, and Mom would wheel me down and in the wheelchair. Variety stuff.
I really wanted to make sure we get this in here. Is one of the things I was so impressed by when we talked on the phone was how comfortably you talked about the sexual abuse and how little shame you seem to carry about that, when so many survivors carry so much shame. And I just find myself wishing I could help them not beat themselves up for having been sexually abused, for sexually responding to abusers who were aiming for the child to sexually respond. Can you say something about how you do that, how you don't beat yourself up for something I don't feel survivors should beat themselves up for at all?
Because I always was, from as tiny infant, I was being trained to sexual stuff. They were training my body into being able to take penetration of bigger sizes, to be responsive, and much of it was given to me in a playful form, in a way that was in no way interpreted as abuse by me. It was fun, it was play, it was love. And so for me, sex was love. I have specific memories of being hooked up at 8, 9, 10 kind of age, being hooked up to electronic things as they trained my body to actually get wet or whatever, to respond the ways they wanted it to whatever they were doing. It might be because I reclaimed some of that stuff. I don't know. I don't quite know why, but even as a teenager, I had friends that used to tell me I should be a sex therapist or write books on sex. I could just always talk about the topic, and I think I understand that the body is animal. It's not. It's a basically an animal thing that has animal responses. That doesn't mean animal low on the spectrum. It just means, you feel touch, you get a response. And I guess that I just understand that it was trained into me, and it was something that was given to me, not that I chose as a child. And in fact, getting turned on helped. I didn't get hurt as much. I got, it hurts a lot less if you're wet in there than if you're dry, that kind of thing. And I think my body learned that sex is way preferable to torture. It just somehow didn't translate into such a bad thing for me. And then I guess because I've always been open about sex, everybody talks to me about sex. Old ladies at the bus stop tell me their sex lives. So I think it just makes it easier to talk about it. I still get shamed sometimes. I still get embarrassed by my sexuality sometimes, but not to the degree that I gather. Well, a lot of people that weren't sexually abused seem to have a whole lot more hang-ups than I do too.
So what would you like? So what would you like to say to survivors who carry so much shame about the sexual abuse and their sexual responses within their child sexual abuse?
With yourself, your body was taught to do that. We learn what our bodies especially learn what they're taught, and they have body memories. We learned to ride a bicycle. We remember how to do it forever. Our body learns how to respond to sex. It does it forever. If you're responding to stuff that you don't want now, like I had a lot of the bondage and S&M and stuff like that. I learned to interpret, because pain was always part of pleasure. I learned to take them and have that together. But as I learned and grew and came to understand that that's not really a nice thing to do to my body, I would really rather not hurt it anymore. Coming to understand that I can have choice now, okay, that's fine. But it's kind of like an addiction. That's what you understand it to be. So until I healed enough, it still had a lot of draw on me. I had this will make me a little embarrassed to say. I had a kind of I don't know that this is anything anybody's ever done, but I have a belief system that says that you can consciously, once you know what it is, with intention, you can consciously say, this is what this is, and I'm going to let it go now, and consciously expel the energy of it to remove it from yourself. Mm-hmm. So when there would be something that would trigger some fantasy, say a gang rape or bondage or whatever, and something would make me want that, trigger me desiring that at a time, and my body would respond and need that, mm-hmm. I would allow, even from a teenager, I would allow myself to fantasize over that, but I would frame it right from the start. This is a fantasy. I do not ever want this to really happen. Mm-hmm. And then I would masturbate and allow myself to build the energy and be with that memory, fantasy, whatever it was. And later, as I grew up, they were actually the memories. That was what I did with the memories of the sexual abuse. Yes. And I would masturbate to it, get off on it, and as I orgasmed, I would expel that energy and say that, okay, now it's gone. That has no hold on me. I am never, ever going to have that happen to me again. And every time I did that with a memory, it ceased to have the draw and the call on the same way. It just didn't appeal the same way. It was like I really was letting go of the magnetic attraction it had for me. That wasn't something I hardly ever even told my therapists about. That was mostly what I did on my own, that one. But it seems to have helped. The odd time I still am drawn to that stuff, but it's like total free choice to say, no, I'm not going to do that to myself. Not a chance. And I feel pain, so I wouldn't want that now. And so it really did help the healing.
That makes sense to me. So the first time you would remember it, it would be tied in with all the sexual energy. You'd actually face that it was a memory. You'd feel the sexual energy. You would masturbate to it, but then it would be released somehow to a large degree.
Yeah. Or if there were particularly safe feeling or particularly twisted up with emotion, they would come back a few times before it would be gone. But in the middle of that, doing that, like I might be masturbating and totally set, and I'd be crying and owning that awful memory at the same time.
At the same time. Oh my
Yeah,
gosh, that's
yeah.
pretty intense.
So it was pretty weird. It was kind of pretty weird. And it wasn't something I much even actually was willing to tell the therapists about.
Good for you. Good for you.
It just was listening to my own self.
Fantastic. Okay, and then
That one got me riled up.
I think
So I still
you're-
have some energy about it.
getting into the nitty gritties of how people deal with these sexual scripts that are trauma driven, that people need to talk about that or it won't get dealt with. Okay,
Yeah,
that's great.
Yeah.
Now, what about you said something about choosing against, an element of choosing against some of those sexual drives, or can you talk about that just a little bit more? Because we talked about that on the phone, that you made, no, I don't want to do that.
Yeah. Progressively, as I reclaimed it, I could have more power, and then I found that I used to resist that whole little masturbation, let it go thing. I used to resist that because it felt bad and dirty and wrong. But I discovered that when I did allow myself to do that, it did really, really make it much more free choice thereafter. And it really made it easy to go, oh, no, I don't want to do that. And the altars that liked that stuff, as they healed and learned that it's not a good thing to do that to the body, the rest of the body, it's not that it doesn't hurt, it's that other parts took the pain. That shifted it, that kind of conscious awareness shifted it. And then as self-respect grew, and that shifted it. So it was a bunch of things. Working on all of the stuff makes a difference for sure. Don't run from it, I guess, is the big thing. Face that too. Face that as just any other memory. Reclaim it and take what you learned from it and decide whether you want to keep it or not.
Thank you. Did you have to learn or kind of train your mind to experience more gentle sexual stimulation, or help some alters learn, because there's so much intensity and pain, with so much abuse sexuality. So was it a process to learn how to enjoy more sensual sexual pleasure?
It was a process to let the alters that had never had that have that. But because of the trainings I got trained to be very sensual in the process. And I kind of get into a zone where I'm in that zone of sensual. Opening that up and making that available to the other alters, and that helped. Yeah.
Wonderful. Okay, now I'm going to get to something more difficult.
Oh, is there such a thing?
For some survivors, what you just said is one of the most difficult, but it seems that for most survivors, the most difficult is the memories of having been forced or manipulated into hurting others.
Oh, yeah.
Do you want to talk about that?
Those are the worst. Those have more power, and those linger longer than anything. Everyone I know with any kind of background, those are the ones that still eat us up. That guilt of what we had to do and what we couldn't stop from happening. And even here today, that's the biggest fear I had to do with doing this, is that someone else would get hurt because of it. No, the biggest thing I would say to survivors about that is you didn't have a choice. It was not a choice. It might have been set up as a choice, might have felt like a choice. It was not a choice. And out of the choices available to you, they were all not really choices.
Yes.
They were all set up, staged tricks and cons, and being forced into things that you didn't understand you were being forced into.
Yes.
And that, forgive yourself. Think about what you would do if you saw some little kid being told they had to hurt something. Would you know that wasn't the kid's fault? Look outside yourself for what you would tell others.
Yes.
And then apply it to yourself. And know that the basic, most strongest thing in a human being is survival. And if we're going to survive what we went through, we had to do what we were told to do to a certain extent. And usually they told us that if we did hurt this person this much, this person wouldn't get hurt that much.
Yes.
And so it was always a choices, and they were all those double bind things where it really wasn't a choice, and you were damned if you do and you're damned if you don't.
Yes.
So forgive yourself.
Yes.
And I can still hear that one valid for me still.
You still need to tell yourself that, to
Yeah.
remind yourself
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
What do you think about that? That you know, in the midst of being tortured, that there's a survival drive that kind of almost animal, like you were saying before, that will sort of push the person, anybody. They say everybody has a breaking point where they will submit to something like that, and I think the survival instinct, you know, is a piece of that. That if a person is hurt badly enough and under the pressure to harm somebody else, that we have a breaking point. That's kind of hard drive. What do you think about that?
I agree with that.
I do.
I agree with that. And I think if you add in, I mean, if you've got torture and if you've got somebody else might be hurt and if you've got your own self hurt and if you're hungry, you're under drugs, you're tired, you got nothing but survival instinct.
Mm-hmm.
That's all that's there.
And you can't help it if it kicks in. That's my sense
yeah.
of it.
My son was 3 years old and he was not following. He would not stay in his room, and I kept putting him in his room. He came and he chomped on my leg like it was a drumstick. I had no thought when I kicked my leg.
Yes.
That was a survival mechanism. It was not abuse. It was my leg is being bitten. There's a basic level that we just function on instinct more than anything, survival instinct.
So how are you doing with that? Would you say that you're pretty much gentle with yourself about those memories, or you still really
Mostly, yeah.
Fantastic.
But then I've reached a point where I mostly just don't think about the stuff.
That's wonderful.
And I'm busy living now more and finding out what this thing called having fun and enjoying life and being alive and making my contribution and all of that. So there isn't as much thinking on it.
Mm-hmm.
But I can still very quickly get into the place where I'm afraid that what I do will cause harm.
Uh-huh.
Or that what I say will cause harm. Or that some effect of what I do will hurt someone somehow.
Uh-huh.
And so that one I still have to consciously work on.
Mm-hmm. Would you say that's a programmed feeling or just a reaction to having been
Both.
abused? It's both.
Both. When you've been made to hurt people, you're afraid that you might be in that situation again, and have to hurt them or hurt somebody, and there's a sort of a worry that that the limits, like that I don't have that control, that I could stop that, that will kick in at some point.
Mm-hmm.
And that sucks to think. I would like to think that there would be no situation that would make me do nasty things.
Uh-huh.
But I'm aware that the human need to survive and will kick in at certain points. If I'm hungry enough, I will eat something.
Yes, I think people who haven't been tortured can tell themselves, "Oh, I would never have done that," but they have no clue. The truth is, I think we all would do that, given certain circumstances.
Well, yeah, and if you grow up seeing and believing differently, then that adds other colors into it too, other ways of, like if that's what's around you, you don't know that wouldn't be the way to be the same way. Your soul might know it, but your mind doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Oh boy, so much to talk about. We talked about the installation of Mr. Tree on the phone.
Yes.
And I thought that was a pretty interesting thing because it kind of covered so many aspects of how a major structure is programmed into a person in terms of both, everything from staged stuff to hypnosis and storytelling and the electroshock somehow in the middle of all of it and the filming of the image. Can you talk about that so that people who don't understand how a structure can possibly be put inside somebody, how that was done with Mr. Tree?
I was very little. Mm-hmm. I was 2-3 years old. I didn't know reality from fantasy, so when I was told they had a stage scene. I was taken out to real trees out in nature and allowed to climb around in them and sit in. They were arbutus trees, and sit in the base and just be friendly with this trees. And there was a lot of stories about trees and their wisdom and all of this stuff. And then there was a stage tree where I was able to go underneath through the way they had set it up. I could go underneath and feel like I was sort of part of it. And then I was still little, and they told me that this tree was inside of me. And that, well, actually they didn't tell me, they asked me. They set it all up. They said, like, this is a wonderful thing. You know, if you have Mr. Tree would all, you know, you have a tree, it's always there. You'll never be alone. Protect you and all of this stuff, and set it up so that then they said, do you want to have Mr. Tree in you? And it's like, yeah, because it seemed like such a good idea. And then there was just this, in the midst of it, there was electroshock, but just a momentary peace that was like, when they were telling me they were putting him in, it was like this, a little bit of shock that, as they spoke, was telling me that that tree was now inside of me. And I was just, I believed. They told me it was inside of me now, and I believed it. And I know I wrote you more, but right now I absolutely cannot tell you what that was.
You mean more about the installation? There was a projection of the image of the tree on your body at one point, a little bit later, like a film, like a slide.
Okay.
No, you're not recalling that at the moment?
I don't remember that at this moment, no.
That's okay.
That's
What
okay.
happened to Mr. Tree?
He's still there,
Okay.
because he's just part of the inner world, sort of the center anchor right here. Just, okay, the inner world is just kind of like this inner place now that's deserted and abandoned, but still kept fresh and clean just in case. And there's just a Mr. Tree is part of that. There's no anything other than that comes to...
And no harmful effect of Mr. Tree anymore?
He was never really harmful.
He was not harmful?
He was not harmful, no. He was actually just the mechanism that they used to have an installed central mechanism, and then they had the branches of Mr. Tree were the branches of training that they put the younger altars each to their own branch, and then each altar had colored leaves that that helped hold their programming and their it was like giving them something tangible that made them know who they were and what they learned. And he was just kind of that. And then his roots, down in his roots was where they put parts that went away, and down in the tunnels, and they locked in the younger ones down in there so that those parts under the age of 6, that the specific ones that they had the 9 virtues, they locked them in under there so that they'd always stay just little. They never ever grew until therapy. That they just always stayed, so that the things that those altars were taught, that lived on Mr. Tree and around Mr. Tree, those were my basic beliefs that were locked in, and they were locked in long before any ability to think abstract or anything like that. They were just little kids' belief systems, and so they believed in magic, and they believed in... They just had child beliefs and the way the world worked and stuff, and so that was just locked in there.
And you said that they were like kind of twisted virtues, that they took things that sounded like virtues and then twisted them.
Oh, yes. Be very loving meant go and tell him you love him meant go and get him off.
I see.
Seduce him, or precociously wiggle in his lap, or whatever. A good soldier's tough and strong and doesn't have any feelings and doesn't let feelings get in the way and just does what has to be done. It was what are the virtues?
So they could get these parts to buy in and then exploit these, did you say 9 things for their purposes?
There was basically 9 paths that they
Uh-huh.
were telling me, yeah.
Yes.
And the different ones had like good meant different things to different paths, different altars.
Yes.
A good girl was different than a good soldier,
Mm-hmm.
and then a good kind of oracle would be different. It wasn't oracle back then, but it just they tailored the. It wasn't that any one had one virtue. It was more that this kind of training gave you these understandings of what the virtues meant, and another type of training gave you a different understanding of what those virtues meant.
Okay, interesting. But they did exploit those virtues for their purposes.
Yeah, yeah.
And
yeah.
the tree was more like a location system of.
Yeah, yeah. A location, kind of a, like the center of the world was kind of the first place that was there and solid and real and something that they could, the altars were little enough they could understand that. And then they could understand branches and they could understand leaves. And so it was something that could be built upon. And it was like, I guess I understood Mr. Tree to be like this wise ancient being, entity that watched over and protected and knew everything. So there was this kind of there was the whispering leaves that told me what to do. Mm-hmm. And they were the wisdom of Mr. Tree, I understood. Mm-hmm. And those were some of the mechanisms for instilling the programming and distributing the programming. First it was the whispers of the leaves would tell me what to do, and then over time it became fairy tales and rhymes and phrases and songs, and they built upon it. But it was like, that was the initial starting point.
Mm-hmm. Okay. A lot of people talk about having a cap and a captain. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
The captain came later when I was being discarded.
Mm-hmm.
When they do a certain amount of training up to a certain age and stage, and then they lock it in, they kind of, that's like putting a cap on it, a seal, and they seal it in with codes, and they have codes that they can use to open that and talk to you and take out the altars and retrain them or traumatize them or whatever, and then lock them back in. When I was around 12, when they were locking away all the military training and altars and stuff, they made a captain altar that was in charge of that seal in a way that helped it. He had crew and he had parts that would swish things away if we got too close, and it was just he was kind of the head of a whole series of mechanisms that locked and sealed everything in, and it's kind of like having a cap on it, but he was called the captain, so it kind of doubled in that way. But I don't know if that's exactly the same as the cap stuff that's in the literature or in other people's experiences.
Very similar, just the whole idea of sealing something up, and very often with codes. And so and that captain, I remember, had a brown uniform and was tied in with all of these fail-safe programming.
Yeah.
And how'd you overcome the fail-safe programming, the booby traps and all that stuff?
A lot of it I kind of went in the back door and under through. Mm-hmm. A lot of times it would be doing, like, reclaim the memory and do it backwards. Okay. So, like, remember it and then do the exact opposite backwards would get in. Sometimes it was doing what I was supposed to do to act, like using the activation codes, but for my own purposes and stuff.
Can you explain both of those? They're very interesting.
Okay.
The do it backwards and use the activation codes for your own purposes. Can you explain that a little bit more to help other people?
Challenging.
It's challenging.
Okay, so you reclaim a memory, and A happened, and then B happened, and then C, and then D. You get the memory. Now, this has locked it in by going A, B, C, D. You want to undo it, you go D. For me, I just did it backwards. I went through and kind of reversed and went D, C, B, A at whatever. It's like retracing your steps, going the opposite direction.
Temporally, time-wise.
Yeah.
So if it was done in this order, you went from the most recent to the...
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Sometimes I would get it at little bits and pieces. And work with it. And sometimes the going in the back door thing.
Yeah.
It's like they've got all this stuff set up and planned, and if you do this, this will happen, and this will happen, and this will happen. So you don't do any of it, and you just go around and you find a way in, and you go, okay, so what's like, look behind that. So it's kind of like when I could zoom out and see that it was a movie because I could see the chords and different things. Maybe I could just go and unplug the cord, or it's a lot of the memories now that they're processed, they're not so clear cut to remember and reclaim now. Yes. I know though that at some of the stuff I had activation code. You usually I think you can ask, and some part knows the activation codes, and they need to be. A lot of people I know that are survivors, myself included, I need it asked to me externally. So that is a necessary mechanism, said or offered externally. I also know that at some point I just got really fed up with all of the system and the process and the triggers and the control boards and the switches and somebody trashed the control room and ripped out all the cords and all the plugs. That's not the way to go.
What happened when you did that?
I got really screwed up for a little while.
Okay.
I kind of sent myself a little bit over the edge, and I was like I triggered half the stuff that could go on, and I was kind of almost crippled on the floor. And I don't know quite how long it was before I thought to phone the therapist and say, help! I don't know what I did. Well, what did you do? Well, and we found out that we'd trashed it in there, and then we had to restore enough order to make it functional again. It worked for me to get a lot of the stuff undone, but I wouldn't really necessarily. You could maybe do it very carefully and systematically, go through and identify everything that's on your control board or in your places, and identify what each part's for, and say, okay, so now we want to know what we'll unplug. We'd like to unplug this. Oh, if we unplug that, that's not going to work. So can we reinvent where the power goes? Or it's just a lot of it's being very creative.
I understand. That makes total sense to me. I've seen that process of systematically, well, we can't do it this way, but we can do that way, and being very creative. I absolutely agree. Okay.
Oh boy. Okay. How about any advice to clergy who have survivors come to them and say, I've been ritually abused, or I've been mind control programmed? Any advice to them?
Off the bat, don't try and get rid of the demons. Don't try and do any of that. You got Satan, you got demons, you got whatever. They are not those really things, probably. Most likely they're going to be altered personalities that were taught to be inner controllers, keeping the plans that were put in place for you, keeping the order and making you follow the rules and not talk and not tell or whatever. Find out what their purpose was. Find out when they were created. Listen and find out what the client says that they feel about this part. That's what they were taught to think and believe and feel about those parts. Don't assume that a couple of words or phrases mean it's that you know and recognize from your religion. Don't assume that that's actually what this client is talking about. They may have some other meaning entirely for those words. Totally listen to your client and totally help them draw forth their wisdom to explain it to you, and their knowledge and understanding of what happened in them and what their parts are and what the meanings are for them. Don't impose yours on them.
Loved ones, friends, support people, significant others, your advice to them?
Oh, get yourself some support. Be very patient. Know that this is not a quick process. It's a slow process. It's an up and down process. Know that what's remembered at first may not be the full story. Know that and believe that the effect on your loved one is still real, whatever the truth turns out to be. Support them as much as you're able, but self-care. Self-care. Look after yourself in the process, or you're useless to them. Help them find ways to have fun, to feel loved. Help them to see themselves through your eyes, their value, their worth. Help them to learn to give themselves credit. Give yourself credit for being able to be there. And don't feel you have to agree with everything or understand everything. Just know that it's theirs, and that just being able to listen sometimes and being able to say, I can't listen anymore. And know the value of a hug and the value of not touching when that person doesn't want to be touched. Listen to hear. Connect. Trust that it will work out. and look after yourself. Maybe even get like Al-Anon. You know, there's AA and then there's Al-Anon. Find something like that for yourself too. Some support system that you can talk about. Because, like for me, watching somebody get hurt was hard. For a person that's watching their loved one go through healing, that's that same kind of thing. You're watching them suffer, you're watching them go through hell, and you can't do a damn thing about it. All you can do is love them and care about them. And sometimes you're going to hate them and the way they behave. Know that that's normal. I mean, some parts of the therapy process and the things that we have to spew out that we never got to spew out, we can be nasty sometimes. Or we can be stupid and helpless sometimes. And it's all just a part of the process, and it's not something to judge. It's just something to work with, go with, flow with. Be as real with yourself and them as you can.
Recommendations to therapists.
Like with the clergy, don't think that you know. Every survivor will be different. Their inner world will be different. Their healing process will be different. What they need at any given time will be different. Allow yourself to connect with these survivors, and maybe even outside the proper level of connection that's always been taught to you. Allow yourself to actually connect on a heart level with this person, and then feel your way through it with them. Help them to feel their way through it and feel it yourself. And be open to ideas and suggestions that are out of the realm of norm. I actually had a therapy session one time where I had an altar that was created and existed in a state of drunkenness. And I could not reclaim that altar's training without getting drunk. And I worked very hard to set this whole thing up. I got a certain amount of booze into me beforehand, got my buddy to drive me, had the therapist knowing I was coming in drunk. We would have so much time before I would be either passing out or sober again. And did that and recorded it so that I could reclaim it afterwards. And poor therapist actually had to give me her wastebasket a couple of times to get sick. But I actually reclaimed. And every time you get sick, if you're just for everybody, not for the therapist, you can actually, every time you vomit from any of this stuff, you can actually call that, here's some more, gone. You can use all of these things that our body does to actually expel it. And so think out of the box and go with what's needed within the bounds of the law.
Okay, and finally, advice to survivors.
Be patient with yourself, be loving with yourself. Give yourself credit for every bit of this. You have survived, you have stayed sane, you are growing and healing and making changes. Give yourself a break. Don't work all the time. But know that it's a long process. You don't want to slack off too much either. Do listen to your own soul of what you need. If you need to draw, draw. If you need to dance, dance. If you need to cry and rage, do that. Find yourself safe outlets for doing the things that aren't, like you can't just scream and rage on the city streets. You will get locked up. So find ways that will keep you safe in the process. Get as much support as you can from as many sources as you can. And divvy it up between people. Do not put it all on one person. You will overload them. Find as many support people as you can and give them the little bits that they can handle. This one's good at helping me dance. This one's good at helping me have fun. This one's good at helping me cry. This one's okay with my anger. Go with whatever is okay for the people with you too. Only read as much stuff and learn as much stuff as is actually helpful to you. Don't go studying everything everywhere, because you might color your own healing process in a way that's not helpful. It's better to know what's needed from in you, because you're the one that lived through it. You're the one that knows. You're the one that feels and hears and remembers and thinks in yourself. And every one of your altars had a valuable, helpful, life-saving purpose, no matter what they did. And every one of them can help now in the healing process and deserves to be loved too. I mean, if they did the nasty stuff, then they're the ones that had the hardest road of all, because they're the ones that end up being the ones that did the bad stuff. And that's nasty. They need to be loved and hugged even more than the ones that were victimized in a lot of ways. And use your own altars to help each other too. Support yourself. Assign tasks based on who has the skills and the abilities. Listen to yourself. Expression mechanisms, whatever is going to work for you. What else would I say? Hang in there. Don't give up. Don't listen when people tell you that enough is enough. Don't listen when people tell you to get over it and get on with life, unless that's right for you. Listen to yourself. You're the one. You're not attention getting. Even if you are, so what? You deserve it. Find a way to love yourself. The little bits. Look at what you love in someone else and find a way to see if you can see that in you and love that in you. And love the amazing spirit and strength you must have to have been surviving that and beyond, in a place where you're doing the work and healing. And know that you can get it. And I'm not finished. I will always have memories. I couldn't relive every one of them if I tried. I don't even need to. Don't care. Don't go searching for every memory you ever had. Go with what you need to learn to heal, to feel happy, to be functional. And know that you could live forever and still not do all the work. So don't try. Do what you need to do to be happy, healthy, whole. Aim for that wholeness and find happiness more and more as you go. And trust that not only is there a light at the end of the tunnel, but you can come and live in the light and it feels kind of nice. And you can have joy and laughter and love and good things in your life. And the more you're true to yourself in this journey, the more you'll get that. And just know that I love your spirit. Thank you for being you. Thank you for this opportunity.
So Trish, we have one more question, and the question is, what do you have to say to your abusers and abusers in general?
What do I have to say to the abusers? Well, first off, what happened to you that taught you these things? What happened to you that taught you these things are okay to do? Where did you learn these things? Do you like doing it? Does it feel good in your soul? Because you don't have to stick with it if it doesn't. You can make changes. You can discover what happened to you. You can find the goodness in you that the rest of us would probably really appreciate seeing. You've got a soul in there. You've got a heart in there. And I'm sure you're doing the best you know how. But there's better ways. And you would feel better inside if you didn't do those things, I'm sure. And the way to stop that is to find out where you learned it, what happened, and to have compassion with yourself so you can have compassion for others. Find your light and let it shine, because I'm sure we'd all benefit. And please just make some good changes. And I hope that the little child in you gets the love that it needs to. Let's make a better world.